Miriam Cates is the MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge. She is with me now. Miriam, are you delighted the Prime Minister has called the election for the 4th of July?
Well, I think every MP is now filled with nerves and excitement a little bit, and also the stress of the first week of the campaign getting literature together. So it is a stressful few days for MPs. But I think the timing is good. We know there's going to be an election this year. It's getting to the point where voters are going to have to make their minds up. So, of course, no MP is going to be delighted that we've now got 6 weeks with an uncertain outcome. But I do think the timing is good, and we've just got to go for it now. That's all we can do.
It's not uncertain though, is it, really? And for MPs like yourself with a majority of about 7,000, it must be very nervous indeed when you look at those polls. You must be worried about losing your seat.
Well, nothing's certain. And of course, the polls show Labour have a substantial lead. But there have been a number of elections where the polling has changed. That doesn't mean that, of course, we're going to overturn that massive lead. But yeah, look at the lead that Theresa May had in 2017, a 20-point lead at the beginning. And it ended up with a loss of a lot of Conservative seats. So, of course, I'm realistic, but also for individual MPs, our own record, our own relationship with constituents, the things that we have achieved locally, the things that we've done in Parliament do count for something. Who knows how many votes they count for, but I do think there is all to play for, seat by seat. And as individual candidates and MPs, all we can do is influence the outcome in our own patch, and I think that's what most of my colleagues are going to be focused on now.
I just want to ask you about one policy. You're talking about what the government has done, but this is about what it has promised it will do. The Today programme on Radio 4 did an interview with Rishi Sunak this morning, and he confirmed that those flights to Rwanda won't take off until after the election. Just want to play a little clip of this.
Will anybody get on a plane to go to Rwanda before the election?
The flights will go in July, and that's a choice at this election.
After the election.
If you believe in stopping the boats, yes, if you believe in stopping the boats.
So you're having an election before you can demonstrate that your plan has worked?
No, we've put the preparations in place. We've hired the caseworkers. We've got the airfield on standby. The flights are booked. That, as people have been seeing, we're already detaining people. But the election is about a choice, Nick, about the future. So if you think stopping the boats is important, and if you think...
So that was Rishi Sunak speaking to the Today programme on Radio 4 this morning. Miriam, there's bound to be a lot of people who are very disappointed, including some of our viewers and listeners, that so much time, money and effort has been put into the Rwanda scheme. And if Keir Starmer becomes Prime Minister, well, not a single migrant will be deported to Rwanda.
Yes, I mean, obviously that is hugely disappointing, and myself and a number of other MPs pushed for this Rwanda bill to be as strong as possible, to strengthen it, to make sure that it would be a deterrent effect. And the truth is, as you've just said, we don't yet know if that will be a deterrent effect, because the time it's taken to pass legislation and go through all those different stages means that we won't get a flight off before July. And I completely understand people's frustration. I think illegal immigration has been a huge problem in this Parliament, not only the security risk, but also people can see just how unfair it is that people can skip the queue, come over here, get put up in hotels. It's almost signified everything that's wrong with our immigration system, and of course it's disappointing. But as the Prime Minister said, there is a choice. We do know that Keir Starmer has said, even if this scheme was working, so even if it was providing a deterrent to illegal immigration, so saving lives and saving the British taxpayer millions of pounds a year, he would scrap it. And that's for ideological reasons, because the Labour Party does not believe in controlling our borders. And certainly many of the forces within the Labour Party would absolutely not believe in controlling our borders. So yes, we can put our hands up as Conservatives and say, we haven't solved this problem yet, but we know absolutely for sure that the Labour Party will not attempt to solve it at all. And they've already said they would ditch the scheme even if it was working. So that's the choice in front of voters.
When you walk down the streets of Stocksbridge and you talk to your constituents, Miriam, how many of them have said to you in the last 24 hours, do you know what, Miriam, inflation's only 2.3% now. I'm delighted, that's why I'm voting for you.
Well, I've been in Parliament until just now, and as you can imagine, over the last 24 hours, I have not been talking to constituents. I have been frantically finishing up everything in Parliament. I've just got home, having travelled home on the train.
You know the point. You know the point I'm making. You know the point I'm making, Miriam. I mean, how many people really think that because inflation is now down, it's still at 2.3%. It's still rising, but it's lower than it was previously. I mean, Rishi Sunak seems to think that that's the thing that's going to make him win the election. Surely that's pie in the sky.
Well, I don't think it's pie in the sky. I think the truth is that polls show a fairly simplistic view of what people think. They ask people to rank which issues are most important to you. Is that the economy? Is it immigration? Is it the NHS? And of course, that's a very helpful tool. But every individual voter is an individual. And when you do talk to people and have at-length discussions with them, you find out all sorts of things about why they vote, like how they vote. Now, for some people, a lot of people, inflation is a big deal. And if they're starting to feel better off because wage inflation has been
how many people in Stocksbridge have said to you, I feel better off because inflation is coming down a little bit?
I said I haven't spoken to anyone in Stocksbridge.
No, ever. I mean, inflation's been coming down a lot over the past 6 months or so. How many people have said, well, do you know what? I can really feel the difference in my pocket, and I'm grateful to you, and I'm grateful to Rishi Sunak for that.
Well, I've certainly had conversations where people recognise that inflation has started to turn around, particularly after the energy crisis, because of course that was a huge hit to people's pockets. So it is a factor. It absolutely is a factor, but it isn't the only one. I completely agree. And I think a mistake that politicians have made in recent years is to think that people only vote on economics. And that isn't true. I mean, Brexit showed us that isn't true. 2019 showed us that isn't true. People vote for a whole host of reasons, but actually values-based ideas, so sovereignty, the idea of being proud of our nation, those kind of things motivate people to vote just as much as economic ones. So I think it's a mistake to think it's a massive factor, but it's also a mistake to think that people won't notice.
As a Conservative MP in a marginal seat, are you pleased Nigel Farage is not running to be an MP?
Well, I don't think he was planning on running against me. I don't know. So, I mean, look, we are a democracy, and I personally think that people should have as much choice as they want. And sometimes our first past the post system makes it very difficult for other parties to spring up. Obviously, there are advantages if you're in one of the larger parties like I am. But I think we should be democratic about this and say whoever wants to stand, they can stand. Now, I can see from his point of view that having achieved an enormous name recognition and a lot of respect from a lot of people over the last few years, if he was to stand and lose in a constituency, which is quite possible because of our first past the post system, that would actually be quite detrimental to his reputation. So I can understand why he hasn't done that. But obviously, as a Conservative, I am pleased that probably means that reform won't get quite the same traction as they otherwise might have done. But we have to take the threat of reform very seriously, because there are good reasons why people are considering voting for reform, and it's up to us to persuade them not to. But everyone who wants to stand should stand.
What are those good reasons?
Well, one of them is a purely practical reason, which is, as I've just said, under our first past the post system, it's very, very unlikely that reform will win a single seat, just because they are unlikely to get the majority of votes in any one constituency. But what they can do, and what we saw in the recent local elections in wards, council wards where reform stood, is they can take a lot of votes away from the Conservative candidate and let in the Labour candidate. Now, that may not bother reform voters, and they that plenty of them have said that they want to vote reform, whatever happens. But I think the more we learn about Keir Starmer's Labour Party, the more we learn about their immigration policy or lack of, their lack of plans, their lack of a willingness to try and clamp down on some of the worst excesses of our culture war, then I do think that some voters will think that it's not worth the risk voting reform.
Well, we've had a number of people. We've had a number of people, including Cliff in Berkshire, sent me a text here. We had a caller on a little bit earlier saying, well, why don't you or other MPs or the Conservative Party in general do a deal with reform like they did with the Brexit Party in 2019? Is that something you would call for?
Certainly above my pay grade, and certainly the deal that was done in 2019 was very helpful to our party. It didn't affect me because I was a candidate, not an incumbent at the time. So certainly those in leadership should consider it. But I think also we've got to be clear, there is a difference between the Conservative Party and reform. And whilst I share an awful lot of reform's views on social ideas, on cultural ideas, on being proud of our nation, I don't agree with their economic policy, for example. And there is a difference between reform and Conservative. So it is up to us to explain to voters what we stand for, who we are, what the differences are, but also we need to be absolutely respectful that voters will make up their own minds. They're not stupid. They do know the difference between different parties. And at the end of the day, that's the beauty of the democracy. They get to put their X in the box that they choose on the 4th of July.
But you are saying, Miriam Cates, that you'd be open to a deal with Reform UK?
No, I personally wouldn't. That's not within my gift. But what I'm saying is, if national party leaders want to negotiate, that's up to them.
Okay.
But certainly all the messaging we've had from Reform so far is that is off the table, that they're not interested in deals, and they will fight every seat that they can.
I think we've had another 4 Conservative MPs saying they're standing down today. This is inevitable, happens in every party, but you have and at the announcement of every election. But you've Hugh Merriman, a real minister, Joe Churchill, Employment Minister, Dame Eleanor Lang, who's Deputy Speaker of the Commons, James Grundy, who's a 2019 Red Wall MP as well, standing down, although the boundaries are changing in his constituency. We've got nearly 70 Conservative MPs standing down, all for all sorts of different reasons, some of them personal reasons, or they've reached retirement age or whatever. But it's not exactly a ringing endorsement of Rishi Sunak. Are they just seeing the writing on the wall here, Miriam Cates?
Well, as you said, they've all got different reasons, and I know it's not very popular to complain about the job, but it is a really, really hard job. And I think a lot of people are staring at 5 years, another 5 years, and wondering whether or not they've got the energy for that, whether they want to do that, whether they want to put their families through it. And so
are they thinking is opposition worth it?
So possibly some of them are, and of course, as we know very well, the outcome of this election is not certain at all, and so people are thinking about that. And it is an incredibly demanding job, not just in terms of time and responsibility, but also the exposure that you have on social media in the public. And so I certainly think that every MP has the right to make up their minds whether or not that's something that they can commit to for another 5 years. And it's right to choose to go if you don't feel that you can, and let someone else stand instead.
Okay, Miriam Cates, thank you very much indeed. Miriam Cates is the Conservative MP for Penistone and Stockbridge.